In this tutorial, we will be able to find the missing dimension of a cylinder if given the volume and one of the other dimensions. So let's get started with talking about what it is you need to do in order to be able to be successful in this lesson. So this lesson is about finding a missing dimension of a three-dimensional circular figure known as a cylinder if given the volume and one of the other dimensions, a radius, a height, a diameter, or a circumference even. So in order to find that missing dimension, you have to be able to make sure you know what formula you're using. So for today's assignment, all of our questions will be about cylinders. So you have to choose this correct formula. We will not be using these today. You also must be able to substitute the given values into the correct variable. The variables here meaning substitute a value in for v, or h, or even r. You also have to be able to solve an equation for an unknown variable. That means you have to use your property of equality, such as division property of equality or multiplication property of equality, in order to get that variable by itself. So let's warm up with some cylinder problems that we worked on earlier this week. I'm going to give you these three cylinders here, and I want you to use the appropriate cylinder formula, right, which is pi times radius squared times the height. So I want you to use that formula to find the volume for these three separate cylinders. So pause the video now and give it a try. I'm going to go ahead and solve these three, and you're going to check to see how you did. I'm going to substitute in the values I'm given into the correct variables. The radius is 10, and that has to be squared. And the height is 6. I'm going to multiply 10 squared times 6, but I'm not going to multiply by pi just yet because I haven't taken my calculator out. So 10 times 10 is 100. 100 times 6 is 600. So I'm going to pause here just for a second. Depending on your directions, you might be able to stop here at this step. If it says leave your answer in terms of pi, then you would just write your label here of feet cubed and you would be finished. But because it says to round to the nearest tenth, you're going to need to take your calculator out, you're going to have to turn it on, and make sure you can find that pi button. So on my fancy calculator here, the pi button is right above the exponent key, which is here, right above my division bar. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to type 600, then I'm going to type my time sign, and then I'm going to have to press second exponent. So 600 times pi, and I'm going to get this really long answer, and that's why it says round to the nearest tenth. So the volume for us is going to be 1,884.955592, right? It says to round to the nearest tenth. So I need to look at the number in the hundredths place in order to decide what to do. The number in the hundredths place is a 5. So that means I'm going to need to round up. So I'm going to round this 9 up to 10. But when that happens, I have only one digit that can fit in that place value. So I have to carry the 1 back over here. So my answer is actually going to be 1,885.0 cubic feet. Now sometimes students will say to me, do I need to write that 0? And the answer is technically yes. They did ask you to round to the tenths place, so you need to have a digit in the tenths place. Let's take a look at question number 2, the blue cylinder in the middle. So again, we use our volume formula by removing the letter R and removing the letter H and filling in the appropriate values. So for us, the radius, which is halfway across the circle, is 4. And the height, which is the distance from circle to circle, is 9. So again, I'm going to use my calculator here, and I'm going to multiply 4 squared times 9, which is 144. So even before I do the whole pi thing, I can write my answer in terms of pi. And now I'm going to take that answer, 144, and multiply it by pi. Whoops, I accidentally pressed divide. So 144 times pi, and I get that really long number there on the calculator, and I'm just going to round it out loud instead of showing the work. So 452.4, right? It has a 3, but the 8 next to it will round it up. And I need my cubic inches, right? Because it's a 3-dimensional figure. Right, the third one here is a little bit tricky because the number given is 14 meters, and that does not represent the radius. The radius is only halfway across, and 14 is the diameter, which is all the way across. So that means I'm going to have to split that value in half to find out that the radius is actually 7. So use my formula to fill in my correct values, and for us it's going to be a radius of 7 and a height of 2. So the volume is going to be equal to 49 times 2, right? So 49 times 2, and that's 98, and I still have to multiply by pi. Now if you wanted to on your calculator, you could type pi times 7 squared times 2 all at one time, and you could totally skip this step right here. I like to leave that step in because sometimes I don't read the directions very carefully, and if it says to leave your answer in terms of pi and you don't, you're going to lose points. So I kind of cover all bases here. So rounding to the nearest tenth is 307.9 meters cubed. Alright, that was a good review. So we got some work in using our formula, and that's important because we're going to use the cylinder formula today on all of our questions. So let's take a look at our first problem. If I tell you the volume, which is the answer, and I ask you to find one of these missing dimensions, then technically you're working backwards. Now some dimensions are a little easier to find than the others. So let's start here. I'm always going to write my formula at the top of the screen, and then I'm only going to erase or replace, right? I'm going to substitute some of these variables determined by what I'm shown in the picture or the story. So it looks like I know the number for volume, and it looks like I know the number here for radius, but I do not know the height. So the volume letter will be replaced, the radius number will be replaced, but the height number will not. So 502.64, and this one is replaced with a 4. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink down my right-hand side here, right? I'm going to simplify that up as much as I can. So I'm going to leave this alone for a minute. And I'm actually going to commute these two terms because I prefer to have my pi at the end of my sentence. So 4 squared is 16. So I'm going to get 16 times pi times h. Now, I didn't multiply by pi yet, and I did that for a reason. Pi is an irrational number, so if I multiply by pi now and then I try and write it down, I eventually have to stop the number, right? There's only so much room. I can't go writing forever and ever and ever. So I'm not going to multiply by pi yet to keep my answer really accurate. So the problem is I want to get h by itself. But in order for h to be alone and isolated, I have to get rid of timesing by 16 and timesing by pi. So if I have to times by 16 and pi, the inverse of that is going to be dividing by 16 and pi. And I can do that at the same time. Since they both have to be divided, I can divide them together at one time. And when I do that, they disappear from the right-hand side, and I use my calculator to do this math on the left-hand side, right? So over here, I'm going to type exactly this in my calculator. Now I know I've got a pretty big fancy calculator here, but I'll show you how you would do it on your TI 30X2S. So in your calculator, I would simply type the numerator 502.64. I would press the division sign, and then I would have to use parentheses down here. So I'm going to divide by both of these things, 16 and times pi. Whoops. 16. Gotta get my cursor back over there. My calculator keeps minimizing and maximizing on me. Here we go. Now on my calculator, I don't have to press the times sign, but on yours, you might. So let's take a look at our answer here. It's a pretty long answer, but if I rounded, it would be a nice even 10. So the height is 10, and I have to use my units, and that's inches. Now this is not cubic, because cubic is only for volume. Height is linear, so it gets a power of 1. Now let's go back to this calculator for a second. I'm going to retype this here, copy and paste it, and I'm going to take these parentheses away, and I want you to see what happens. Look at my answer when I don't write the parentheses. You see how different it is? There's a huge difference between an answer of 10 and an answer of 98.7. So it's important that you use these parentheses to represent that you are dividing by both, not dividing just by 16 and then timesing that whole answer by pi. So please be careful when you're using your calculator. All right, let's try a problem like this one more time. Pause the video if you want to give it a try on your own. The volume of a cylindrical container is 942.47 cubic feet. If the radius of the container measures 10 feet, find the height of the cylindrical container to the nearest whole number. Again, I'm going to use my cylinder volume formula, and I'm going to remove the variables I do know and substitute them in with the information I was given. Right? So my volume is 942.47 and my radius is 10. So as I rewrite this problem, I'm going to leave the left side alone, and I'm going to commute these two terms because I prefer my coefficient in front of the variable. Now remember, I'm going to divide by both things at one time, so I have to use parentheses, and that is important. Turn your calculator on, clear the screen, and type your numerator first, 942.47 divided by parentheses 100 times pi. Round your answer to the nearest tenth or whole number. For us, that's going to round up to 3. So these cancel. So the height is 3 feet. Let's try it again. Without a picture this time. The volume of a cylinder is 54 pi inches cubed. The radius is 3 inches. Find the height. Again, I always use this formula. I'm going to substitute in the values that I'm given information for. So I was given information for the volume, and I was given information for the radius. So the radius was 3, and the volume was 54 pi. Now that's interesting, but it's not uncommon. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes you will write your volume in terms of pi, meaning you won't actually multiply by pi. So what happens when I simplify the right-hand side of my question here, and remember when I commute these terms, 3 times 3 is 9. When I go to divide both sides by 9 pi, right? 9 and 9 cancel, pi and pi cancel. And on this side, the pi's will actually cancel. So I don't even have to type them on my calculator. So when I turn my calculator on this time, I'll show you both ways, and you'll see that it doesn't really make a difference here. So if I do 54 divided by 9, I'm going to get a 6. And if I did 54 times pi divided by parentheses 9 pi, I get the same answer. So what's nice about this is if your volume is given in terms of pi, you can skip that step on the calculator and just cancel them out. So our height is equal to 6 inches. Alright, so those that was a couple different examples on how you can solve for the letter h, or to find an unknown height. Let's take a look at a more challenging question. The volume of a cylinder is 648 pi cubic inches. If the diameter of the cylinder is 12 inches, find the height. Now remember, your volume formula doesn't have a diameter in it. It has a radius. So if I tell you the diameter is 12, you need to know that a radius is half of the diameter. So instead of substituting in a 12 for my radius here, I'm going to substitute in a 6. I kind of like when the volume is given in terms of pi, because then I know I don't have to type it into my calculator. So 648 pi is equal to 36 pi times the height. I'm going to divide both sides by 36 pi. And all I need to type into my calculator now is 648 divided by 36. So 648 divided by 36. Beautiful. The height is 18 inches. Alright, now this is probably one of the hardest questions you'll get. The volume of a cylinder is approximately 3,694.51 cubic centimeters. If the height of the cylinder is 6 inches, find the radius. So remember, we're filling in the variables that we know, and this time we know the height and the volume. We don't know the radius. So when I fill in the height, which is 6, and I fill in the volume, which is 3,694.51, then when I rewrite this, you'll notice that my variable 6 and pi, they're being multiplied by a number squared. So even if I were to divide by 6 pi, which traditionally allowed me to complete the problem, because these canceled out, you'll notice that my r still not alone. It actually has a power here, and that is not r, that is r squared. And if we want to know what r is, then this will not be the final answer. So let's see what we've got so far. So when I clear this out and do 3694.51 divided by 6 pi, oops, forgot my parentheses. Remember, that's going to mess up your whole problem. There we go. So it looks like my radius is approximately 195.9999, so I'm going to round that to 196. Now the deal is, we need to know what r is, not r squared. So I have to get rid of this little power. And the only way to get rid of an exponent is to use a root. And if the exponent is a square, then you're going to use a square root. And that symbol, which we studied earlier, looks like this. And on your calculator, it's generally found by using the shift button. So I'm going to press the shift key, or the second key, and then I'm going to press my square power. And there it is. Square root of 196 is 14. So r is equal to 14 centimeters. Don't forget your units, they're important. Alright, let's try something like that again. So you may want to try and pause the video, see if you can try this one on your own first. But it's just like the last one. The volume is 1847.202 and the height is 12. So 1847.202 is equal to 12 pi times the radius squared. I'm going to divide both sides by 12 pi. That gives me a radius squared, right? And then I know on the next step, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So let's go get that number. 47.202 divided by parentheses 12 times pi. 48.999, I'm going to go with 49. So if I take the square root of 49, that leaves me with 7 centimeters. All right, hope you're doing okay. Let's try this one here. This one is probably the most challenging of them all. The volume of a cylinder is 502.65 cubic feet. If the circumference is 25.13, find the height. Wow, this one we haven't talked about in a long time. So the circumference is the distance around the circle. And in our formula, the only thing we want is the distance from the center of the circle to the side, right? The radius. We have no interest in the circumference, but we do have to know what the formula for a circumference is to see if it can help us find the radius, right? This is the height, this is the radius, that's the circumference. So if you remember the formula for the circumference, it's pi times the diameter, or 2 pi r. So if I know the circumference is 25.13, and on the right-hand side I know what 2 and pi are, then if I were to divide both sides by 2 and pi, that would tell me what r is. And that's what I need, right? I know what the volume is, 502.65. I know what pi is. I don't know what r is, and I don't know what h is. But if I could find r, then I could find h. So let's open our calculators, and let's clear them out and compute 25.13 divided by, and don't forget you need parentheses here, 2 pi. And it looks like the radius is 3.999, which we're going to go with 4. So the radius is 4. So I'm going to plug that in here. So 502.65 is equal to 4 squared times pi, so that's 16 times pi. And then I'm just going to divide both sides by 16 pi. Alright, this wasn't so bad. So I had to add this little extra step here. But it wasn't that hard. So it looks like the height, which is 502.65 divided by parentheses 16 times pi. 9.999999. I'm going with 10. So 10 feet. That's as difficult as it can get. Alright, I want you to pause the video, try these 3 questions on your own, and then turn the video back on to check your 3 answers. I'm going to solve them now. So I skipped a middle step. I simply wrote the product of 2 squared right down here. But the answer to the height is 10 centimeters. Let's check to see how you did on number 2. What is the radius? So let's see, 135 divided by 15 pi equals 2.864. Do this right? $2.864, 2.9. And then don't forget, you've got to take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to go with approximately 1.7. All right, third one. The circumference is 31.41. Divide both sides by 2 pi and you'll know your radius. Uh, 31.41. There we go. So the radius is approximately 5. All right. So the volume is 863.93, and the radius is 5. Don't forget to square that. And the height is unknown. So I'm going to divide both sides by 25 and pi, because 5 squared is 25. So 863.93 divided by 25 pi. Oh boy. Typed the wrong thing. There we go. 10.999. I'm going with a height of 11 inches. Okay, so that concludes our lesson on finding missing dimensions. Practice the extra worksheet problems that I attached to the Google Classroom, and let me know if you have any questions.